Welcome to the Learning to Love podcast. I'm Paul Moschetta.
And I'm Evelyn Moschetta. We are marriage therapists who have been married and working together for over 40 years.
I thought today a good idea would be to go over some of the key concepts and ideas that we've introduced so far, and we've also got to go back and pick up the couple example that we gave last week of Grace and Jason and show how we use some pointers to help them get unstuck.
Some of our relationship tools.
Yes.
Okay.
So for those of you listening, I hope by now you have a clear idea of what we mean by a survival mentality, which was one of the key ideas we mentioned last week. Simply put, a survival mentality is the day-to-day state of mind we all operate from. It's the movie in our head we're all addictively watching and listening to. The non-stop chatter of our likes and dislikes, fears and desires. And also we said that this survival mentality is full of images. Images about ourselves, images about our partner.
As psychological images.
Yes, psychological images. And if you're in an intimate relationship that isn't going well, it's a good bet that you're probably entertaining a lot of negative images about your partner. So that's a survival state of mind, automatically reacting to the flow of self-centered thoughts, feelings, and images. And they get in the way of your clear seeing and knowing truly what's best for you. Now, the other idea we talked about was imageless perception. It's a term that we coined that points to clear seeing when there are no images or very few images operating in your relationship. It's the way most couples start off together before they drift apart. Imageless perception requires uprooting old images so that you can see each other new again. And this brings us to a new relationship tool we want to talk about, which is called witnessing.
So, witnessing is being alertly aware of what's going on inside of you, of all that happens in your mind and through your senses. From the witnessing stance, you merely want to look, watching the movements of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise up and pass along the surface of your consciousness. Witnessing means seeing the workings of your ego self and not acting on them. Witnessing happens when you pay attention to that which most of us rarely pay attention to. You're always talking to yourself, but you rarely, if ever, focus on this inner dialogue as an outside observer might. Watch your mind. Observe what's going on inside yourself, the thoughts that pass by one after another. That's when you'll get a first-hand view of your ego mind at work. Witnessing is an attitude of watching the watcher. The watcher is your self-centered ego, that part of you which continually makes judgments, conclusions, and interpretations of all that it sees and experiencing. Witnessing is a special kind of looking. It's a choiceless awareness, free of any judgment, any choices, any opinions. It is simply a watching of your inner reactions and responses carefully, but without any blame, no blaming yourself and no blaming the other person. It's just a watching.
I like what you said. It's a watching and paying attention to that which we hardly ever give attention to.
Right.
We're also caught up with the stream of thought that it just carries us along and we react. Rather than, as you said, stepping back a little bit and
Yeah.
watching what the thoughts are and where
Yes.
they're leading me.
Yes, yes. And seeing your reactions,
Mm-hmm.
because most of the time it is just a reacting to each other. And that's what gets us in trouble.
Well, that brings us back to the example we talked about, Grace and Jason, who were caught in their mutual images of one another and were merely reacting to those images and causing a lot of distance. It distorted their communication, it damaged their trust, and it just kept recycling this hurt and anger between them.
And they were drifting further and further apart from each other.
Absolutely. So Grace, it turns out, had an image of Jason as being critical of her and overly preoccupied with his own interests and concerns. She said she felt blamed and ignored.
And Jason felt that Grace was overly materialistically demanding, that she was not appreciative of him, and that he could never really please her. There was always a feeling that it wasn't enough. I couldn't do enough for her. And he felt resentful.
Yeah, sure. So witnessing helped them see when these negative thoughts and images that they held about each other came up in their mind. Witnessing gave them the choice as whether to entertain these images or let them go. Entertaining them, dwelling on them, makes them stronger and ensures that you'll keep reacting to one another in the same old negative way. Letting them go weakens them, so they lose their power to shape your behavior toward one another. Witnessing helps each partner get to a neutral place emotionally where building back something positive is possible. As long as you're in that automatic reactive cycle where images are driving your interaction, nothing positive is going to happen. It's only by interrupting that cycle that we can build back something new.
Right. So Jason had to then become an expert at seeing what goes on across his mind, seeing that he had to feel that he was a perfectionist, seeing that he felt really a sense of not feeling good enough about himself.
So for him, this meant making it a priority not to be critical and finding fault, and making sure that Grace didn't feel ignored. So he had to pay more attention to her and be less absorbed with himself. He had to make sure Grace felt seen and heard by him, that she was the object of his interest and his desire.
And she, Grace, had to see how important it was for her to feel special and important, and how getting things made her feel special and important, rather than looking a little more deeply at what she was masking, a feeling of inadequacy and low self-esteem. And she no longer she no longer saw that the wanting more was the way that she got for herself a sense of specialness and self-esteem. And she began to find other ways, inner ways, to satisfy that need of feeling good about herself. She couldn't just rely on Jason for that.
So using these tools of witnessing and imageless perception helped them break the cycle of hurt and anger that was driving their relationship. it put them back in touch with seeing what they still loved and cared about in each other. And this became the focus of their interaction, building one another up rather than tearing each other down.
Yes. And Grace started doing some interesting things. She started getting back to her painting. She became involved in other interests. She was taking some classes. She started doing some volunteer work. Most importantly, she began developing new friendships. And all these things helped her now to feel so much better about herself. And she began to see Jason in a different light, especially since he was very careful not to keep showing up as this critical, unloving, ignoring husband.
Well, yes, it was critical, as you said, that he had a realization of how much time he was spending just lost in his own preoccupations, his own worries, his own need to control everything, and let go of that and began putting more of an active interest in developing something positive going on between them.
That's right. So really these tools of imageless perception, for them becoming aware of how they saw each other, what they were now responding to, it's these two images relating to each other rather than the real people. And the witnessing, that was so important because they saw how their ego self was working and diminishing each other and diminishing themselves.
And I think it's important to remember, witnessing is non-judgmental. Witnessing is just seeing without any choices, without any condemnation.
Right.
So when I'm looking at myself and I see that I was petty, or I see that I was irritable, or I see that I was self-absorbed in my own pursuits, there's no condemnation that goes with that observation.
Right.
I don't get into blaming myself. I just see what the fact was and make a commitment to show up differently, knowing that that's what my relationship requires.
Right. I see the fact of who I am in that moment, and I pull the plug on it so that I can be fresh and new and available to you.
And using these tools definitely changes the flavor of your relationship. It changes for the positive the quality of your togetherness. And that's the tail that wags the dog, so to speak.
Right.
It's really hard to be happy. If you're in an intimate relationship or you're married, it's really hard to be at your optimum working best in any other area of your life if your relationship is unhappy.
Yes, that's true. And by the way, the witnessing tool, this couple began to use it in all their relationships, not only with each other. They began to see how they were, how their ego self was working with friends, with relatives, with parents. So it served them on so many, many levels.
But it does take a conscious effort. So if you're in a relationship that isn't going well and you want to get back to that in-love feeling, these are tools at your disposal that you can use. But it will take a conscious effort to put your best self forward. So until next time, we look forward to speaking again.
And thank you so much for listening.